$4,000. That is what my sister-in-law spent on hidden cameras to prove I was an unfit mother, and the only thing those cameras ever proved was that Deanna Pierce should never be trusted near a router. I want you to sit with that number for a second, because by the end of this story you will understand exactly how precise it was, down to the receipt, and exactly how badly it backfired on the person who planned it. My name is Ren Calloway. I am 34 years old. I work in digital forensics and cybersecurity for a regional financial firm, which means my entire professional life is built around noticing the small inconsistencies other people miss, the data trail nobody thinks to cover because they assume no one is looking that closely. For 9 years I was married to a man named Trent Calloway. We have a daughter together, Lily, who is 7 now and who still sleeps with a stuffed raccoon missing one eye, because Trent and our old dog had a tug-of-war over that raccoon when Lily was 3, and the raccoon lost, and Lily has never once asked us to replace it. I tell you that detail because I want you to understand that this was a real marriage, with real history in it, not a story I can flatten into villain and victim from the very first scene. I think stories that do that are lying to you a little. What I am going to tell you is messier than that, and I think it is more useful for being messy. The unraveling started small, the way these things usually do. Trent runs a logistics consulting business with a partner, and over the 2 years before we separated, he got quieter about money. Not secretive exactly. Quieter. I remember a specific evening, maybe 18 months before everything fell apart, sitting at the dining table with our laptops open across from each other, paying bills the way we always did on the first of the month. I noticed a transfer out of the joint account, $4,000, gone in a single move, no note in our shared budgeting app where we logged everything down to the smallest grocery run. What was this? I asked him, turning my screen toward his. He glanced at it for half a second, less time than it would take to actually read the line item, and said it was a software license for the business, some logistics routing platform. When I asked which one, he gave me a name I had never heard of, said it fast, the way you say something you have rehearsed rather than something you simply know. Then he asked if we should repaint the porch before summer, and I let the conversation go where he steered it, because I did not yet have a reason to think the redirection was deliberate. I am trained to notice patterns of incomplete information for a living, and it is a strange and uncomfortable thing to notice that pattern starting to form in your own kitchen, across your own table, from your own husband. By the time we separated, 11 months ago now, I had stopped asking questions out loud and started watching instead, the way you do when part of you already knows the answer and is simply waiting for the rest of you to catch up to it. We agreed on what we both called a trial separation, though I think everyone in the family understood it was really the beginning of a divorce, even if nobody said the actual word out loud yet, not even to each other, not for a long time. I found a small apartment 15 minutes from the house we used to share, modest but clean, with a second bedroom for Lily and a kitchen window that caught the morning light in a way I genuinely loved the first time I walked through it with the leasing agent. I want to be honest with you about that week. Moving in alone, at 33, with Lily's booster seat still smelling faintly like the inside of my old car, was one of the loneliest weeks of my entire life. I unpacked boxes after she went to bed each night and cried over things that had no business making me cry. A spatula. A half-empty bottle of her favorite shampoo. The specific way the hallway light buzzed for a second when you first flipped the switch, a small electrical stutter that the old house never had, that I somehow took as proof I had made the wrong decision, even though I knew, underneath the grief, that I had not. But there was something else under the loneliness too, something quieter, which was the first real sense in a long time that I was finally telling myself the truth about my own life. Deanna is Trent's older sister, 4 years older, and if you have ever had an in-law who decided within the first 6 months of meeting you that you were a temporary arrangement rather than a permanent fixture in the family, then you already know everything you need to know about her. Deanna runs an event planning company out of a converted storefront downtown, and she is sharp in the way people mean when they say it as a warning rather than a compliment. Organized to a degree that borders on intimidating. Precise about everything, including, I would later learn, exactly how precise she could afford to be while still keeping her own hands clean. For 9 years she made it clear, in small ways that were never quite rude enough to confront directly, that she did not think I belonged. Holiday seating charts that somehow always put me at the far end of the table, near the children, while the adults clustered closer to the head where the real conversation happened. Family photographs where I was cropped out of the version that got framed for the mantel in Eleanor's hallway, while the full version, the one with me actually standing in it, lived only on somebody's phone and never made it anywhere permanent. A specific Thanksgiving, for years into the marriage, when Deanna went around the table handing out small wrapped gifts to everyone, candles, a set of coasters, little nothing presents that meant everything in that moment, and skipped straight past me to Trent's cousin on my other side, then announced, loudly enough for the whole table to hear, that she must have simply forgotten one, in a tone so deliberately light that it made the omission land harder than if she had simply said nothing at all. None of it was ever enough, on its own, to be the thing you could point to and name. It was just a long accumulation of small temperatures, and every single one of them was cold. So when Deanna showed up at my new apartment 3 weeks after I moved in, holding a box from a home security company and wearing the particular smile she uses when she has decided to be helpful at you rather than helpful for you, I want you to understand that some part of me already knew to be careful. I just did not know yet what careful was going to mean, or how much it was eventually going to cost me to find out. She let herself in without knocking, which had always been her way at the old house and apparently still was at the new apartment, and set the box down on my counter like a gift she expected gratitude for before I had even fully looked at it. "I got you cameras," she said. "Smart home ones. Motion activated, cloud storage, the whole package. You are here alone with Lily now, and given everything, I just think it makes sense to have eyes on the place. For her safety. For her safety." I remember repeating that phrase back to myself later that night, alone at my kitchen table, turning it over the way you turn over a coin you are not sure is real, because it sounded right and felt wrong, the way a counterfeit bill feels almost right in your hand until you actually hold it up to the light and see where the print is just slightly off. I said thank you. I want to be clear about that, because I think people sometimes expect the person telling a story like this to have an instant flash of suspicion, some dramatic refusal right there in the kitchen, the camera shoved back into Deanna's arms before she even sets down her purse. That is not how real life works. Real life is you accepting a box of cameras from your husband's sister because she has framed it as concern for your daughter, and you would rather look slightly foolish later than accuse a member of your own family of something monstrous based on nothing but a feeling in your chest. I set the cameras up myself that weekend, while Lily watched cartoons in the next room, occasionally wandering in to ask if she could help, holding the small screwdriver like it was a serious tool for a serious job. One in the living room, angled toward the front door and the small corner where she keeps her crayons and her half-finished drawings of our old dog. One in the kitchen, mounted near the spice rack, which felt strange even as I drilled the bracket into the wall, though I told myself it was for fire safety, for peace of mind, for exactly the reasons Deanna had given me over the phone. One in the hallway outside the bedrooms, which Deanna had specifically suggested the night before, "Just so you can see who is coming and going at night," she had said, a sentence that meant nothing to me in the moment and that I would replay, weeks later, with a very different and much colder understanding of what it actually implied. It was a Tuesday evening, Lily already asleep, raccoon tucked under one arm, when I sat down at my laptop to do something that is almost autopilot for me at this point in my career, which is check the network traffic on any new device I bring into my home. It is not paranoia. It is professional muscle memory, the same way a locksmith probably cannot help noticing the quality of a stranger's deadbolt the second they walk through a door. I pulled up the router logs and started watching the data from the 3 new cameras, scrolling through the connection history almost absently at first, expecting nothing. The cameras were not only logging to the cloud account I had set up myself, the one I had registered with my own email, my own password, my own confirmation screens, all of it done on my own laptop with my own hands while Lily watched cartoons on the couch behind me. The actual data, the live feed, the stored footage, every frame of it, was also being mirrored in real time to a second account, one I did not recognize, registered under an email address that took me 4 minutes to trace back to a domain Deanna's event planning company used for its internal staff logins. I sat there in my kitchen, in the quiet hum of my new apartment, staring at a screen that confirmed something I had not even let myself fully suspect. My sister-in-law had not given me cameras for Lily's safety. She had given me a set of devices that let her watch my home, my daughter, and me, from wherever she wanted, whenever she wanted, without my knowledge and without my consent. I did not say anything to anyone that night. I closed the laptop. I checked on Lily, who was asleep with one arm thrown over the one-eyed raccoon, breathing slow and even in a way that made the whole apartment feel briefly, impossibly safe despite everything I had just learned. I sat on the edge of her bed for a long time, thinking about what kind of person spends real money, for $100 a camera, $1,200 for the set, plus whatever the cloud storage plan cost on top of it, to quietly surveil a woman she has known for almost a decade. I thought about Eleanor, Trent and Deanna's grandmother, who had called me the week before just to ask how Lily was settling into the new place, who had never once in 9 years made me feel like an outsider in that family. I thought about how strange it was that the coldest person in that family was the one who had just handed me a gift, and the warmest one was the one who had simply called to ask if I was okay. I want to tell you that I confronted Deanna the very next morning. I did not. I want to tell you I tore the cameras off the walls that night and mailed them back with a note she would never forget. I did not do that either. What I actually did was something that surprised even me, and it is the choice that everything else in this story grows directly out of, so I will leave it right there for now, because what I decided to do with those cameras instead of removing them is exactly where this story really begins to turn. For days passed before I let myself fully accept what I was looking at, and I spent most of those 4 days doing the thing I am genuinely good at, which is verifying. I am not someone who acts on a hunch when I can act on confirmed data instead. In my line of work, jumping to conclusions gets you laughed out of a courtroom, or worse, gets the wrong person blamed for the right crime, and I was not about to make an accusation against my own husband's sister without a foundation underneath it that could actually hold weight. So I traced the network logs methodically, the same way I would for any client. I confirmed the mirrored account was active around the clock, not occasionally, not just when motion triggered the cameras, but continuously, which meant it was pulling far more data than any reasonable safety setup would ever need, far more than even an anxious parent would bother collecting. I confirmed it had access to live audio as well as video, a detail the marketing material for the camera system had conveniently left out of the box copy, buried instead in a terms of service document nobody actually reads past the first paragraph. I confirmed, through a public records search that took me less than an hour at my own desk during a lunch break, that the domain the mirrored account used belonged to Pierce Event Co., Deanna's business, and that the specific email address followed the exact same format she used for every other professional account she had ever given me over the years, her first initial, her last name, the kind of detail that feels almost insultingly easy to trace once you know to look for it. A coworker named Priya stopped by my desk that same afternoon, noticed I had barely touched the sandwich I had brought from home, and asked if everything was okay. I told her it was just a long week. She gave me a look that said she did not entirely believe me but was not going to push, and went back to her own desk, and I remember being grateful, in that small moment, for someone who knew when to leave a question alone. By the time I had all of it confirmed, sitting alone at my kitchen table at 11 at night, Lily asleep down the hall, I was not angry yet. I want to be honest about that, because the anger came later and it came in a far more useful form than it would have that first week. What I felt first was something closer to a held breath, the feeling you get right before you understand that the floor under you is not nearly as solid as you believed it was. The floor finished giving way 3 days later, on a Thursday, when I picked Lily up from school, her backpack covered in stickers she had earned for a week of good behavior, chattering the entire walk to the car about a classroom hamster named Pretzel. I got her settled with a snack and a tablet show in the living room and came back to the front door to find a man in a polo shirt standing there with a clipboard, asking if I was Ren Calloway, and handing me an envelope before I had even fully said yes. Trent had filed for emergency primary custody. The petition cited, among other things, concerns about Lily's home environment and the stability of care in my new residence, language so deliberately vague it could have meant almost anything, except I already knew exactly what it was going to mean, because I had already seen, with my own eyes and my own router logs, exactly where the footage of that home environment was going. I waited until Lily was occupied with her show before I let myself fully read the document at the kitchen counter, and I want to tell you that legal language has a way of making the worst things sound almost administrative, almost reasonable, right up until you understand exactly what is being asked for. Primary physical custody. A request for a home study. A line, near the bottom, requesting that any existing video documentation of the residence be made available to the court, a line that, 3 days earlier, I would have read and not understood, and that I now read with my stomach dropping straight through the floor. I sat on my kitchen floor that night, once Lily was asleep. Not the table. The floor, my back against the cabinet where I keep her snacks, knees pulled up, the paperwork still folded in my hand because I could not bring myself to set it down yet. I let myself feel exactly how bad it was for about 20 minutes. I am telling you this because I think there is a version of this story where the person at the center of it is fearless from the very first scene, and I do not want to give you that version, because it would not be true and it would not be useful to anyone listening who has ever actually sat on a kitchen floor like that themselves, paperwork in hand, child asleep down the hall, wondering how a life gets this complicated this fast. I was scared. I was furious in a way that had nowhere to go yet. I thought about every cold seating chart, every cropped photograph, every small temperature Deanna had set over 9 years, and I understood, with a clarity that nearly knocked the wind out of me, that none of it had ever been incidental. It had been groundwork. The cameras were not an isolated bad decision made in a moment of overreach. They were the final tool in a plan that had been quietly assembling itself for far longer than I wanted to think about. Trent's petition did not come from nowhere either, and I want to give him his due weight in this story, because turning him into a cartoon would be its own kind of dishonesty. Trent is not a mastermind. Trent is a man who is conflict avoidant to a fault, who let both his business and his marriage drift because confronting either one always felt harder than letting them coast, and who I genuinely believe, even now, did not fully understand the scope of what his sister was building on his behalf. I think back to small moments throughout our marriage that I did not understand the weight of at the time. The way he would defer to Deanna on family decisions that had nothing to do with her, where to spend a holiday, how to handle a disagreement with his own mother. The way he signed paperwork his sister handed him without reading it closely, the same way he signed our mortgage refinance without reading every page, trusting that someone else had already checked it for him. He answered what he was asked, in the careful, technically true, somehow incomplete way he had been answering me for 2 years about the money. He is, in his own way, as much a tool in this story as the cameras were, and that does not excuse what he eventually did with our daughter's trust fund, which you will hear about soon enough, but it does explain why Deanna was always the one steering and Trent was always the one simply along for the ride, telling himself he had no idea where the road actually led. 20 minutes on the kitchen floor is what I gave myself. Then I got up, washed my face in the bathroom sink, looked at myself in the mirror for a long moment, the kind of look where you are checking to see if you recognize the person looking back, and made a decision that I think is the real turning point of this entire story, more than any single confrontation that comes later. I was not going to remove the cameras. I sat with that decision for a long moment after I made it, because every instinct in my body told me to rip them off the walls right then, to scrub my home clean of anything Deanna could see into, to reclaim the privacy that had been taken from me without my consent. But I do this for a living. I know that the moment you tip off someone who is surveilling you, they either go quiet or they go more careful, and either way you lose the only advantage you actually have. Right now, tonight, Deanna believed I had no idea the cameras were compromised. She believed she had a clean, ongoing window into my life, one she could use to build whatever narrative she wanted, fed straight to Trent's lawyer with no fingerprints on it. If I left the cameras running and simply lived my honest, ordinary, competent life directly in front of them, every single frame she collected would work against the case she was building, not for it. And more than that, if I left them running, I would also be able to see exactly what she did with them, who she shared the feed with, what she said when she believed no one but Trent's legal team was ever going to be listening. So that night I did 3 things, methodically, the way I would document evidence for any client. I built my own clean record first, screenshots, timestamps, the exact moment I discovered the mirrored account, all of it preserved before I touched anything else in my home, exported to a drive that lived nowhere near my regular devices. I called a family law attorney the next morning, a man named Marcus Reyes who had been recommended to me by a coworker after her own difficult divorce, and I told him everything in one long, unbroken phone call from my car in the school parking lot, the cameras, the trust fund irregularities I had already half noticed over the past 2 years, all of it laid out in order, my voice steadier than I expected it to be. He listened to the entire thing without interrupting once, and when I finally finished he asked exactly 2 questions, both of them precise, both of them the right questions to ask, the first about whether I had altered or removed anything since discovering the mirrored account, the second about whether Lily had ever been alone in a room with only Deanna present since the cameras went up. The way he asked it, careful and unhurried, told me more about whether I could trust him than anything he said afterward. And I made a decision about how I was going to carry myself going forward, on camera and off, which was simply this. I was not going to perform anything. I was not going to perform a perfect, sanitized version of motherhood for an audience I now knew was watching, and I was not going to perform outrage or fear either. I was just going to be exactly who I already was, because that, it turned out, was the single most dangerous thing I could possibly hand Deanna Pierce. I think that is the moment I actually stopped absorbing it. 9 years of small cold treatments, 11 months of a crumbling marriage, 4 days of confirming a betrayal I did not want to believe, and a custody petition built on stolen footage of my own home. That is a lot of absorbing for one person to do quietly, without ever once raising her voice. But sitting at that kitchen table, watching the cursor blink on a screenshot of an email address I now knew better than my own, I felt something settle in me that I can only describe as resolve, the kind that does not need to announce itself or raise its voice to be real. The kind that simply starts working, quietly, in the background, the way the best and most dangerous things always do. The first win cost Deanna her entire theory of the case, and it cost her nothing else, which is exactly why it worked so well. For 2 weeks I lived an unremarkable, ordinary life directly in front of 3 cameras I knew were feeding a private account I had no legal access to yet. I made breakfast every morning, eggs for me, the same cereal Lily has eaten since she was 4 and refuses to switch from no matter how many new boxes I bring home hoping she will surprise me. I helped her with her reading homework at the kitchen table, sounding out words together, her finger tracing under each line the way her teacher had taught her. The same table where I had once sat with a process server's paperwork still clutched in my hand. I had ordinary, slightly boring evenings, the kind where the most dramatic thing that happens is a 7-year-old insisting she needs exactly 4 crackers before bed, not 3, not 5, 4, and negotiating that number with the seriousness of a treaty between nations. I packed her lunches the night before. I sat through a parent-teacher conference where her teacher told me, unprompted, that Lily was reading above grade level and had become the unofficial classroom expert on the hamster named Pretzel. I want to tell you this was easy, performing normalcy while knowing I was being watched, but it was not. It took a discipline I did not know I had in me, the discipline of refusing to give someone the version of yourself they are hoping desperately to catch, especially on the nights when I was exhausted and short-tempered and would have, under any other circumstances, simply let myself snap at a small thing the way every parent does sometimes. Marcus filed a formal response to Trent's petition that laid out, in careful legal language, exactly what kind of home Lily actually had. School attendance records showing she had never once been late. Pediatrician notes confirming regular checkups, all of them current, including a recent vision screening that came back perfect. A character reference from her 2nd grade teacher that I had not even asked for, that the teacher had simply offered the moment she heard, in the gentle, sideways way these things travel through a small school, what was happening to one of her families. I remember sitting in Marcus's office while he walked me through the filing line by line, and at one point he looked up and said, almost gently, that whatever footage existed of my home, it was going to show a woman who got her daughter to school on time. Whatever footage Deanna had been quietly collecting for 2 weeks showed a mother who made dinner most nights from actual ingredients rather than takeout containers, who read bedtime stories in increasingly ridiculous voices because Lily specifically demanded a different voice for the dog character every single night, who occasionally lost her patience over spilled milk and then apologized for losing her patience, the way real parents do. There was no chaos for Deanna to find, because I had simply refused to give her any, and that refusal alone cost her the entire narrative she had spent $4,000 trying to build. The second win came almost by accident, which is often how these things go in real life, far more than in the version of events you would script if you were making it up. While reviewing the router logs again one evening, partly out of professional habit and partly because I genuinely could not stop checking, the way you cannot stop pressing on a bruise to see if it still hurts, I noticed the mirrored cloud account was not only receiving feed from my 3 cameras. There was a fourth device on the same account, one I had not installed and did not own, logging from a completely different physical address. It took me less than an hour of cross-referencing public network registries to confirm what that address actually was. It was Trent's home office, the room where he kept the physical paperwork for Lily's trust fund, the room neither of us had touched together since the day I moved out, the room I had always simply assumed was his, private, separate, none of my business anymore. Deanna was not only watching me. She was watching her own brother. I sat with that fact for a long time that night, laptop closed, staring at the dark kitchen window, because it told me something important, something that reframed everything I thought I understood about why this was happening. This was never only about protecting Trent, or about punishing me specifically for some imagined slight. It was about control, total and unconditional, the kind of control where you do not fully trust anyone, including your own family, to manage their own lives without you quietly monitoring it from behind a screen they do not know exists. That single discovery cost Trent something he had not even realized was missing, which was the comfortable illusion that his sister was unconditionally on his side rather than simply managing him too, in her own way, the same way she had been managing me for 9 years. I did not tell him yet. I filed it away, the way you file away a piece of evidence you are not ready to use until the exact moment it will do the most good. The third win was the quietest of all, and I think, looking back, it was the most important. I stopped reacting to Deanna entirely and started building instead. Marcus and I spent 2 careful weeks establishing a clean, fully authenticated chain of custody for everything I had gathered, the original discovery, the network logs, the second device at Trent's house, all of it preserved in a way that would hold up under scrutiny if it ever needed to. I came into his office twice a week after dropping Lily at school, sitting across from him at a conference table covered in printouts, going through timestamps line by line, cross-checking dates against my own calendar to make sure nothing could later be challenged as inconsistent or manufactured. We were not going to confront anyone with a feeling, or with raised voices across a holiday table. We were going to confront them with a record, verified and dated and undeniable. That is the part of this story I think people tend to skip past when they imagine it like a movie, the unglamorous weeks of quiet documentation, the late nights cross-checking timestamps after Lily was asleep, the patience it takes to make sure that when the dramatic moment finally arrives, it actually means something instead of just sounding good. There was a fourth small win in there too, one I almost did not count at the time because it did not feel like a win in the moment. Trent's attorney requested a home visit as part of the custody evaluation, clearly expecting, based on whatever Deanna had told him to expect, a chaotic or neglectful environment. The evaluator who came was a calm, unhurried woman named Carol who spent 45 minutes in my apartment, asked Lily a series of simple questions about her routine, her friends, her favorite parts of the day, and left with nothing but a folder of unremarkable, entirely positive notes. Trent's attorney never requested a second visit. That silence, the absence of any follow-up, told me everything about how badly that evaluation had undercut whatever case Deanna thought she was building. I want to take a moment here and tell you about a conversation I had with Priya, the coworker who had noticed I was distracted weeks earlier, because I think it matters for understanding where my head actually was during this stretch. We were in the break room one afternoon, both of us waiting on the same slow coffee machine, and she asked, carefully, whether I wanted to talk about whatever had been going on with me. I told her some of it, not all of it, the cameras, the custody filing, leaving out Deanna's name for the moment because some habits of family loyalty are hard to fully shake even when the person no longer deserves them. Priya listened, and then she said something I have thought about often since. She said that in her experience, people who have to manufacture evidence against you are usually doing it because the truth was never going to be enough on its own. I did not have a clever response to that. I just nodded, because she was right, and because some truths land better coming from someone who has no stake in the outcome at all. I also want to tell you about a smaller moment with Eleanor during this same stretch, because it is easy, telling a story like this, to make it sound like I was carrying the entire weight of it alone, and that was not quite true. She called on a Sunday afternoon, ostensibly just to check on Lily, and somewhere in the conversation she asked, gently, whether everything was all right with the custody situation, since Trent had mentioned filing something. I kept my answer measured, the way Marcus had advised, but Eleanor said one thing before we hung up that I held on to for weeks afterward. She said that she had known me for 9 years, and that whatever was happening, she trusted what she had seen with her own eyes over whatever anyone told her secondhand. I did not know yet how much that trust was going to matter, or how soon I was going to need to call on it directly. The work of building the chain of custody with Marcus was slower than I expected it to be, and I think that slowness is worth describing honestly, because revenge stories tend to skip past the boring middle in favor of the satisfying parts. There were entire afternoons where the two of us did nothing but verify that a single timestamp matched across 3 different logs, because a defense attorney worth anything would look for exactly that kind of inconsistency and use it to throw out everything else. Marcus kept a whiteboard in his office where he mapped out the timeline in black marker, dates down one side, events down the other, and by the 3rd week it had become a kind of strange comfort to me, watching that timeline fill in, evidence accumulating in a way that felt solid and permanent in a period of my life where almost nothing else did. It was during this stretch, almost 3 weeks after I had first discovered the mirrored account, that I noticed something new synced to the shared cloud calendar. Deanna's account was still, almost carelessly, linked to a meeting, scheduled for the following Tuesday, 2 in the afternoon, location listed simply as my apartment, attendees listed only as D and S. I knew Deanna's schedule well enough by now to know that Tuesday at 2 in the afternoon was exactly when I would be in a client meeting 40 minutes away, the kind I could not easily reschedule without raising questions at work. Lily would be at school until 3. Someone had checked the calendar I had shared with Trent for years, originally for custody coordination, and had picked the one window in the entire week where my apartment would be completely, conveniently empty. I did not know yet who S was. I am telling you now, because I think you have probably already started to guess, that the single letter attached to that name is going to change the entire shape of this story. But in that moment, sitting at my kitchen table with the calendar invite glowing on my screen, all I actually knew was that someone was about to let themselves into my home, on camera, believing with total confidence that no one would ever see what happened there. I did not cancel the client meeting. I did not call Trent. I did not do anything visible at all, which by this point had become the single most effective strategy one had. I let Tuesday come. Tuesday came, and I sat through my client meeting 40 minutes away with my phone face down on the conference table, which I want you to understand took more discipline than almost anything else in this entire story. I am not naturally a patient person when it comes to waiting for the other shoe to drop. But I had learned, over the last month, that patience was not the same thing as passivity. It was strategy, plain and simple. So I sat through an hour and a half of a quarterly security review, took notes I am sure were perfectly competent, nodded at the appropriate moments, answered a question about firewall configurations that I am fairly sure I answered correctly despite half my mind being 15 miles away, and drove home afterward with my hands gripping the wheel the entire way, fast but careful, the way you drive when your body knows something your mind has not let you fully process yet. I picked up Lily from her after-school program, listened to her tell me, in extensive detail, about a disagreement between 2 of her classmates over whose turn it was to feed the class hamster, made dinner, ran her through her bath and her bedtime routine, read 2 chapters of the book we were working through together, and only once she was finally asleep, raccoon tucked under one arm as always, did I sit down at my kitchen table and open the laptop. I want to walk you through what the footage actually showed, because by the time I sat down to watch it that night, I understood I was looking at the exact midpoint of my own life rewriting itself in real time. Deanna let herself into my apartment using a key I had given her months earlier, back when things between us were at least functional enough to make sense of her having one, for emergencies, for Lily, for the ordinary trust that exists between family members who have not yet learned how badly that trust can be used against you. She was not alone. The woman with her was younger than Deanna, dark-haired, dressed for a business meeting rather than a casual afternoon visit, carrying a slim leather portfolio under one arm, and I recognized her almost immediately, not because we had ever met in person, but because I had seen her name on emails forwarded to me months earlier as part of a logistics contract Trent had been negotiating for his consulting business. Sloane Whitfield. Trent's business partner on a new venture he had been quietly developing for the better part of a year, the same venture I now understood, watching the two women move through my living room with the easy, practiced familiarity of people who had been coordinating closely for a long time, that Trent's missing money had very likely been funding all along. They were not there to plant evidence, not exactly, not in the way I had braced myself for. They were there to take photographs, careful, deliberate ones, of the apartment exactly as it was. Lily's crayons scattered slightly off the edge of the table. A stack of unopened mail by the door I had been meaning to deal with all week. Ordinary, small, completely unremarkable messes that, framed correctly with the right caption attached, could be made to look like something closer to neglect. Deanna directed the angles the way she directs everything in her professional life, precise and unhurried, moving a single throw pillow 2 inches to the left, tilting a lampshade, crouching once to get a lower angle on the laundry basket I had not yet folded, all of it staged with the same exacting attention to detail she would bring to a wedding she was planning for someone else's family. And then, because they believed themselves to be completely alone in my home, they talked. I am not going to repeat every single word, because some of it does not matter to this story and some of it I still find difficult to sit with even now, months later. But the parts that mattered, I will give you exactly, because they deserve to be heard exactly as they were said. Sloane mentioned, almost in passing, setting her portfolio down on my counter, that the funding round for their venture was still short, that they were a meaningful amount away from where they needed to be by the end of the quarter, and that her investors were starting to ask uncomfortable questions about the timeline. Deanna told her not to worry, that Trent's account would clear before then, that she had, in her own words, already made sure of it. Sloane laughed, easy and familiar in a way that told me immediately this was not a new arrangement between them, and said something about how lucky it had been that Deanna introduced them in the first place, 2 years ago now, hadn't it been, at that logistics conference downtown, the one where, Sloane said, she almost hadn't gone at all. Deanna said something then that I will remember for the rest of my life, said it lightly, almost cheerfully, the way you might mention you had picked a particularly good restaurant for somebody's birthday. She said that she had known almost from the beginning that Ren was not going to last in the family, that some people simply do not fit no matter how long you wait around for them to grow into it, and that introducing Trent to someone who actually understood his business, someone who could be genuinely useful to all of them, had never been an accident. It had been planning ahead. Sloane asked, almost idly, what would happen if the divorce got messy, if I fought back harder than expected. Deanna said that was exactly what the footage was for, that between the home environment concerns and whatever the cameras eventually caught, there would be more than enough to make sure the court saw things the right way, and that once custody was settled, the rest, meaning the money, meaning the business, meaning whatever future the two of them were quietly building together, would settle itself right behind it. I sat in my kitchen, the same one where I had once sat on the floor with my back against the cabinet trying to remember how to breathe, and I understood, finally, completely, the entire architecture of what had been quietly built around me for years without my knowledge. Deanna had not simply disapproved of me for 9 years in the vague, instinctive way I had always assumed. She had, at some specific point roughly 2 years earlier, decided I was a problem with a solution, and the solution involved introducing her brother to a business partner who could eventually become something more than a colleague, all of it funded in part, I would confirm in the days that followed, by money quietly pulled from Lily's trust account under the vague description of a diversified family investment, money that was never going to be diversified anywhere except directly into Sloane's company, and by extension, eventually, into whatever return Deanna had personally negotiated for her role in arranging the entire thing. This was the twist that neither Deanna nor I, nor I imagine you watching this right now, had fully seen coming when this story began. It was not jealousy, not in any simple sense. It was not even really about me specifically, not in the deeply personal way I had assumed for 9 long years of cold seating charts and cropped photographs. It was a financial arrangement wearing the costume of family concern, and I had simply been the obstacle standing between Deanna and a return on an investment she had been quietly cultivating for 2 full years before I ever found a single camera in a single box. I did not cry watching that footage, though I want to be honest that some part of me wanted to. What I felt instead was the particular kind of clarity that arrives when a long, confusing pain finally resolves into a shape you can actually understand. I had not been imagining things for 9 years. There had been a reason, a real one, and now I had it, time-stamped, authenticated, sitting safely on a secure drive Marcus had set up specifically for material like this. I called Marcus first thing the next morning, before Lily was even awake, and read him the relevant portions of the transcript I had already typed up word for word the night before, my hands steadier on the keyboard than they had any right to be. He was quiet for a moment after I finished, and then he said, simply, that this changed everything, that what we had now was not just a defense against a bad faith custody claim, it was an active financial fraud involving a minor's trust account, and that the second piece moved this out of family court and into territory that institutions take very seriously, very quickly. I want to tell you about the rest of that Wednesday too, because the hours between sending the documentation to compliance and actually hearing back from them were some of the longest of this entire ordeal. I went to work as if nothing had happened, sat through a meeting about a client's outdated encryption protocols, answered emails, picked Lily up at the usual time, and the entire time I felt like I was carrying something enormous and invisible, the way you feel carrying a full glass of water across a room you know has an uneven floor somewhere. Not sure exactly where the dip is but certain it is there. Marcus called around 4 that afternoon, not with news yet, just to check in, and I remember sitting in my car outside Lily's school, engine off, listening to him explain the actual mechanics of what was happening on the institutional side, how a fraud flag on a minor's trust account moves through review, what kind of documentation actually triggers an emergency freeze versus a standard one. I asked him, somewhere in that conversation, whether he thought Trent had known the full extent of where the money was going. He was quiet for a second, and then he said that in his experience, people like Trent rarely ask the question they do not want answered, and that not asking is its own kind of choice, even if it does not feel like one from the inside. I also want to be honest about the version of myself that existed in those in-between hours, because it was not entirely composed. I sat in that car for longer than I needed to after the call ended, watching kids file out of the building in their backpacks, and I let myself cry for the first time in weeks, not out of fear this time, but out of something closer to relief, the strange exhausted relief of finally being believed by the systems and the people who actually had the power to do something about it. Lily found me wiping my eyes when she climbed into the back seat, and asked if I was sad. I told her I was happy, which was true, just not in the simple way a 7-year-old understands happiness, and she seemed to accept that, the way kids accept most things adults tell them, with a brief nod and an immediate pivot to whatever she actually wanted to talk about, which that day was whether we could get a hamster of our own. By Thursday morning, the account was frozen. Whatever funding Sloan and Deanna had been quietly counting on to close out their round before the end of the quarter simply stopped existing, mid-sentence, the way money does when someone finally turns the lights on in a room that has been dark for 2 full years. If you have been with me through this whole story, you already know I do not believe in dramatic confrontations for their own sake. I believe in laying out the truth so plainly and so completely that drama becomes unnecessary, and that is exactly what I did, 2 weeks later, at Eleanor Calloway's house, on a Sunday evening that was supposed to be an entirely ordinary family dinner. I want to tell you about Eleanor for a moment, because she has been present in this story from the very beginning, even in the long stretches when she was not physically in the room. She is Trent and Deanna's grandmother, 81 years old, the kind of woman who has outlived 2 husbands and one entire era of how families are supposed to behave, and who never once, in 9 years, treated me like a temporary arrangement. She raised both Trent and Deanna for several years after their own mother became ill, back when they were still in grade school, and I think that history is part of why her opinion still carries the weight it does in that family, even now, even with grown children of their own. She called the week I moved out, just to ask how Lily was settling into the new place, no agenda behind it, no questions about Trent, just genuine concern. She called again 2 weeks after that, for no reason at all except that she said, plainly, that she had been thinking about me. I had come to understand, over the course of this entire ordeal, that Eleanor was not just the warmest person in that family. She was its actual emotional center, the one person whose judgment the rest of them, even Deanna, had never quite stopped needing, whether they admitted it out loud or not. She invited the whole family to Sunday dinner the way she did every few months, the same roast chicken recipe she has made for decades, the same mismatched dishes that have somehow outlasted 3 different kitchen renovations, the same insistence that everyone arrive by 5 even though dinner never actually starts before 6. I almost did not go. Marcus, who by this point had become someone I trusted with more than just legal advice, told me gently that I should, that if I was going to lay this out completely, it should happen in front of the one person whose judgment actually mattered to everyone seated at that table, Trent and Deanna included. I arrived a few minutes early, Lily's hand in mine, and found the house smelling exactly the way it always had, rosemary and butter and the particular scent of Eleanor's old gas oven that no amount of renovation had ever fully replaced. Trent was already there, helping set the table in the stiff, overly polite way people move around each other after a separation, careful not to bump shoulders, careful not to make it strange in front of his grandmother. Deanna arrived a few minutes after us, breezy and composed as always, kissing Eleanor on the cheek, complimenting the table setting, asking Lily about school in a voice that, knowing what I now knew, sounded almost unbearable to listen to. Dinner started the way it always did, easy conversation about nothing in particular, Eleanor asking about everyone's week, Lily recounting, in full and dramatic detail, the latest developments in the ongoing saga of the classroom hamster. I let it run its natural course for the first 20 minutes, eating slowly, watching the table the way I had spent the last month watching footage, looking for the right moment rather than forcing one. I brought a tablet instead of an argument. I want you to really hear that, because I think it is the single most important sentence in this entire story. I did not bring accusations. I did not bring 9 years of accumulated resentment dressed up as a speech I had rehearsed in the car. I brought 4 minutes of footage, queued up carefully in order, and when the conversation reached a natural lull, the kind that happens at every family dinner right before someone asks for the roles to be passed around again, I simply said there was something everyone needed to see, and I pressed play. I let it run without commentary. Deanna directing the staged photographs of my apartment, moving a pillow 2 inches to the left. Sloane laughing easily about the funding round, about how short they still were. Deanna's voice, light and certain, explaining that she had known almost from the very beginning that I was not going to last in the family, and that introducing Trent to someone who could be useful had never once been an accident. The table went quiet in a way I do not think I will ever fully be able to describe to you, except to say it was the kind of silence that has actual weight, the kind you can feel pressing against your own chest from across a dinner table. Trent's face went through something I can only call a slow collapse, the particular look of a man realizing all at once that the sister he had trusted unconditionally his entire life had been quietly managing his marriage, his business, and his money for 2 years, without his full knowledge and without his real consent. He set down his fork at one point, very carefully, the way you set something down when you are afraid your hand might otherwise drop it. "Why," he finally said, looking at his sister, not loud, almost too quiet to hear. Just that one word. Deanna did not deny any of it. I think that surprised me more than almost anything else that happened that evening. She simply sat there, very still, her composure cracking for the first time in 9 years that I had ever witnessed, while her grandmother looked at her for a long, unbroken moment and finally asked, in a voice quieter than I had ever once heard her use, whether any of it was true. Deanna said yes. She tried, briefly, to explain herself, said something about wanting what was best for the family, about Sloane being a better fit for Trent's business, about how she had only ever been trying to protect what their grandfather built, the company, the family name, the whole fragile architecture of legacy that I think Deanna had spent her entire adult life believing rested specifically on her shoulders. Eleanor let her finish. She did not interrupt, even when I think every one of us at that table wanted her to. Eleanor did not raise her voice when she finally spoke. She did not need to. She told her granddaughter, plainly, that she had spent 81 years building a family on the idea that you protect each other honestly or you do not protect each other at all, and that whatever Deanna believed she had been doing, it was not protection, it was theft, of money, of trust, of a little girl's stability, all of it dressed up carefully as concern. She said that protecting a family name meant nothing if you had to lie to the people inside it to do it. And then Eleanor looked at me, across that same table, in front of everyone seated there, and said that I had always been welcome in her family, long before any of the rest of them had the good sense to make that clear to me themselves. I did not say much in that moment. I did not need to. I had already said everything I needed to say, 4 minutes of it, queued up in order. The consequences that followed were not dramatic in the way television teaches you to expect, and I think that is exactly why they ended up feeling so deeply satisfying. The frozen trust account was fully recovered over the following weeks, with every irregular withdrawal documented and eventually repaid, partly from Trent's own personal assets once he understood the full scope of what he had unknowingly enabled to happen under his own roof, and partly through a settlement Sloane's company agreed to rather than face a formal fraud investigation. Trent withdrew his custody petition within the week, not because Marcus pushed him to, but because I believe, for the first time in a long time, he was actually looking clearly at what his sister's involvement in his life had cost him, including a marriage he had not fully understood he was losing to someone else's careful, patient planning. He and I have since settled into something that resembles, on good days, an actual functional co-parenting relationship, careful and a little formal still, but real. Deanna's event company lost 2 major clients that quarter, not because anyone leaked the footage publicly. Advertiser-friendly families do not air things like that across the internet, but because the kind of trust a business like hers depends on does not survive a story like this traveling quietly through a small enough circle of people who all know each other, who all talk to each other eventually, at the same country club, the same school fundraisers, the same small overlapping circles that make up a town like ours. The real cost to her was never financial, not primarily. It was her grandmother's regard, which she had clearly valued far more than she had ever let herself admit out loud, and which she was not going to get back easily, if she ever got it back at all. The last I heard, she and Eleanor speak perhaps once a month now, brief and careful conversations, nothing like what they once had. I was awarded primary custody of Lily within a month, uncontested. I want to end this with the part of the story that has nothing to do with cameras or trust funds or any of it, because I think, honestly, that is the part actually worth remembering. Marcus had been in my life for 2 months by the time of that dinner, first as my attorney, then, slowly, as something I had not planned for and had not seen coming, which I have come to learn is usually how the genuinely good things arrive. He noticed things. He noticed that I take my coffee the exact same way every single morning, oat milk, no sugar, regardless of how impossibly bad the week behind me had been. He noticed that I do the dishes when I am working through a problem, not because the kitchen actually needs it, but because my hands need something steady to do while my mind works the rest of it out. He noticed, too, the small things about Lily, that she likes her sandwiches cut diagonally and not straight across, that she narrates her own actions under her breath when she is concentrating, the same way I apparently do, a habit neither of us realized I had until he pointed it out one evening and we both laughed about it for longer than the observation probably warranted. 2 weeks after that dinner at Eleanor's, he was in my kitchen, the same one where I had once sat on the floor with my back against the cabinet trying to remember how to breathe, helping me dry the dishes for no particular reason except that he liked simply being there with me. Lily was already asleep down the hall. The window above the sink had gone fully dark, the way it does in early evening this time of year, and somewhere in the quiet rhythm of him washing and me drying, he set down the plate he was holding, turned to me, and told me, quietly, without any performance behind it at all, that he had known for a while now that he was not just looking out for my case anymore. I did not say anything dramatic back. I just handed him another plate to dry, because by then I had learned that the truest things in my life had never once needed to be announced loudly to be real. They only needed to be allowed to stay. If you have made it this far with me, I hope you will stay for whatever comes next, because something tells me this is not quite finished. Subscribe if you want to be here when it isn't. That Thursday night, 3 weeks after the dinner at Eleanor's, long after Lily was asleep and the apartment had gone fully quiet, I got a notification on my phone. One of the old cameras, the one that had been logging silently from Trent's home office, the one nobody had ever physically gone in and removed, had just come back online.